Krak? I wish we had a screenshot of that. All right, so thank you all for joining. As you know, we're going to be reviewing Krak by Edwidge Danticat. I'm super excited. So first, we'll just start by giving y'all a general overview of the book, and then we'll go into why we chose this book, and then we'll just get into dissecting it. So I'm actually not sure if we're going to have different just synopses of the book, but I'm interested to see. So for me, when I think of Krak, I really think of it as 9 different stories analyzing just the life of Haitians inside and outside of Haiti specifically, and how that relationship to home kind of shifts and changes who they are. And I feel like they're all searching for how to get back to that place of centeredness that they had in knowing a home.
Yeah, I think that's pretty close to what I felt. I think the 9 original stories, and then also like the new edition, the 10th one, it's just basically like you said, a story that is talking about the experiences of predominantly women, and how they're connected to Haiti in different ways, whether like they're immigrants or whether they're actually born in Haiti, and then how they're also in some ways connected to each other.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I found that interesting too. We obviously won't get into it right now, but that piece of like, it was surprising sometimes how these stories connected to each other, for sure.
Yeah.
All right, so why this book? I'll give my reason, and you can go ahead with yours. So for me, when I think of Edwidge Danticat, I just think she's a writer that people don't read enough. And I feel as if she really had her moment in the late 90s and early 2000s. And that's when she had her first book, and then she had this book. And I feel like she got a lot of like notice and awards, but she's still writing, and I still see her ink, like her pen, on so many writers. Like, I don't think we'd have a Roxane Gay without Edwidge Danticat. I don't think we have a Marlon James without Edwidge Danticat. And I'll go through that with some of these stories as we get through it. And you can just see the direct just impact she's had on like so many contemporary writers. And I think that like her pen is a pen that should be read more and acknowledged, because I think her style of writing and bringing together such heavy topics in a way that feels communal and also healing, I think we should talk about more. So that's why I wanted to read this book.
Yes. And then mine's just a little more logical. So this was actually one of your 3 reads that we came together on, and it stuck out to me, one, because it was something that I probably wouldn't have picked up like on my own.
Yeah.
2, because it's a collection of short stories, and in the past I've really liked that, and I haven't read a short story collection in a minute. And then when you said that they're all connected to Haiti, and they're all kind of, well, you didn't say they were connected to each other, but then like that was revealed through reading, it kind of drew me in. And then like as I was reading that, I was also like reading more about the author, and like she published this when she was like 26. Like I think she was 26. I'm like, that is young. And I mean, it's like you said, very heavy topics, like and I do feel that the way that she wrote them, almost kind of poetic, made it a little more like, digestible, if that
Absolutely.
yeah.
Yeah. And even just her herself, like, so she came. Sorry, I'm gonna get a call right now. But so she came here from Haiti, or Haiti, as they would say in Haiti, throwing off the like tongue of the colonizer. But she came here when she was originally 12, and then she published like her first, I think, short story was published at 14, which is just amazing to me. So she's been writing for a long time, and I think, like you were saying, just the way she writes is sometimes like just poetic. So I think that like we should all read it more, for sure.
Yeah.
So before I guess we get into breaking down each story, what were some common themes that you felt like just throughout the book kept popping up for you?
For me, the first one that comes to mind is separation.
Mm-hmm.
So like sometimes separation from family, sometimes separation from Haiti itself. Another thing that I was actually talking to my boyfriend about was the thing that kept coming to my mind was sugar, and how even in, I believe the story, which one was it? A Wall of Fire Rising,
Yeah.
how how present sugar was. And it came up a few more times, and just the connection and the history of sugar plantations and then eventually sugar mills to the Caribbeans, like that. So that came to me. Mother-daughter relationships,
Mhm.
definitely. That's a huge one. And then there was one other one, and this was like kind of one that I was thinking about a little deeper, was how like some of the stories remove, like as the characters kind of um were removed from Haiti, how like they kind of lost some of the traditions. So for instance, I was comparing Children of the Sea, where the lovers were writing, and the
Yeah.
male who was on the ship was saying like, I would have tried to woo your dad and like get, you know, like get his hand and all this, or get your hand by wooing him. But then in the last story, Caroline's Wedding, it was like these two, well, one of the girls was born in Haiti, but then came to America, and the other one was not. And how her fiance turned husband like never tried to woo the mother. And I
She
thought that that was really fascinating.
yeah.
Um, and you go ahead.
Connection. I actually hadn't really thought of that, but I love that. And I guess we get to it more, but because the mother, she wanted that so badly.
She did.
Right?
She was, it's tradition. Like, this is what you do. This is what I think of when I think of my daughter being about to be married off.
Mhm. Whew, okay. So for me, I think that some big things. One was memory, like you were saying. And just so for the people, like you were saying, who were in Haiti, right, versus those who were in the US, and just even, I guess, even in the last story, it really came up of just the questions that were asked and the expected answers. And it's like, have you forgotten? You don't remember how this goes? And it was more than just a story. It was that you don't remember your connection to home, right? You don't have memory of it, and the lack that that creates. I thought that that was throughout all of them. One, the choices that we make, and then the consequences that come with that for everyone, not just for ourselves, but for everyone in connection with us, and also over generations. I thought that was super powerful. And then the other one was around parents. I think we see in like every story the parents trying to do the right thing but still failing in some type of way, whether it be for selfish reasons or for trying to do better for their children, and then doing it in a way that is completely separate or different from what the children desires. I thought that was another thing. And that also gets into the new addition to the story and what that adds or takes away from the original work, for sure. For sure.
My thoughts.
so, so let's just get right into it. The first story, Children of the Sea.
So this was one that you said that you had a lot, like
Yeah.
there was a lot to unpack for you.
So let's just go through it. So when you have you have a couple. Well, they're not technically a couple, but they would have been a couple had circumstances been different. So you have two young people who are divided because of the war in Haiti. So one guy takes flight and he's on the ship trying to get to America, and the girl, she's still back home, and they're writing these letters to each other, but they're not sure if they'll ever actually see each other again or ever get the letters. And I think that that's just one thing that immediately popped out to me, is the beautiful language. There were so many times I was just like, wow, the way in which she wrote that, it just made you like pause. And she
Yeah.
talks about mountains, but then the connections that she makes as well. I felt like she said so much without saying it. And I think that's an art form because it still allows for the reader to have their own imagination. So that was one thing for me. But the way in which she wrote about him being on water immediately drew me to slave ships, like just immediately. And I don't know if that was the intent, but even as it goes on in his connection, well, what eventually happens to him, and him saying the ancestors were like calling me home. So I think that for me was super powerful because when I think about Haiti, I think about all of us in the diaspora, right? And I think that just that immediate connection that we have to like the water or what it may mean, and thinking about being on these boats or being out in the ocean and thinking about our ancestors, I think it's almost automatic that it happens sometimes, kind of against our will. So just that description in and of itself was powerful. I also thought about the current status and what's happening in Haiti, because Haiti, unfortunately, it's been in this consistent cycle of like war for power and control over the island since the revolution, right? And so we open up with a story that's discussing the dictatorship and people fighting for their freedom from dictatorship. And then we have that happening right now as well, trying to figure out what is the future of Haiti, what will it be? So I was really reflecting on that as well. And then just also the dangers of becoming what we say we hate, I think was a big thing for me, because I think we see it again and again when revolutions happen. People know that they hate the current structures, but they haven't conceptualized what the new structure should be or what it will actually look like. And the danger of that here was the fact that you had an island in disarray. You had people who were then subjugating the people they said they were trying to free. And for me, that was just so powerful because we keep seeing it again and again. So that was just huge.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I guess the consistent pain, the pain that everyone in this story was in. The parents were in pain, the neighbors were in pain, the two lovers were in pain. And no matter what they did, it was never the right solution. So what do we do with that? I think it was my big question.
Okay.
So yeah.
So going back to what you said about water, I do like reading him being on a boat, boat where the sails were sheets with spots on them. Definitely thought about slave ships. I'm from Virginia and I live on the coast, and most of my family we've lived on the coast for a minute, so I'm very connected to water, very close to the Atlantic Ocean. And that very much impacts my own identity and everything like that. I also this is a chapter that I had to read multiple times because the first time that I read it, I didn't get it. The second time I read it, I kind of got a little bit more, and then the third time I picked up some. But what I really took from this chapter was space and the lack thereof space, and I felt like that came up in other stories. But just the fact that these people on the ship are sharing this space, they're sharing sickness. There is a pregnant woman who, loses her baby and then eventually like commits suicide. There is like this kind of, I don't know, it's almost like an inhumane type of environment. Like you have to pee and poop in front of your people. And then also like going to the woman, I still felt that lack of space, like, and maybe it wasn't physical space, but it was like space to say what she wanted. So at one point she told her dad, like, I love this man, just so new. And I felt like there wasn't really space for her to like say or express, what she felt. And also her mother and her father, like it was just that's what kept coming back to me, was like a lack of space. And what does that mean, like to not have your own? And then let me look at my notes because I have a lot of notes. Also, the idea of butterflies, I thought that so beautiful. Like so like on the cover of mine is actually a butterfly. And so the first read, I didn't connect like the black butterflies. And then the second read, I was like, oh, okay. So what did you think about the butterflies?
So I thought of it more so as the connection to the spiritual realm and nature, right? Because the messages were there, and I think they came up in multiple stories. The messages were there if you knew where to look, right? So even in one story, a young boy, when he found out his mother had died, he was the one who had to look, and the sign would come to him, right? So I thought the messages of the butterflies here, because when we think of butterflies, we think of beauty, we think of like freedom. Often it's the story of the caterpillar becomes the butterfly, right? But here, she's literally like running from them at some point because she doesn't want to receive the intended message for her.
Yeah.
So I thought it was powerful, like just imagery.
Yes. Yes. I also I thought the idea of the old man with the pipe wanting his name to be written down,
Mm,
I thought that that was like extremely powerful. Like his really long name, and he was like, write my name down, even though he knew that the notebook would be thrown over.
yeah.
Like to have your name, like to maybe like have your, I'm coming back to space, but like to have, I'm losing. I can't really think. I want to
Right.
say just like what that means. Like I want to base it, like my space here or my time on the ship did happen, even
Right.
if I didn't get my destination.
Not mattered. Like I was here.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I think for me too, another message that came, it was two more. One was just the pain and disconnect across the diaspora. So I'm going to read something really short, but remember at one point when they were just out on the water and they were like, maybe we can go to the Bahamas. Like maybe we can just get to the Bahamas or the Bahamas will rescue us. And the woman or someone said, they treat Haitians like dogs in the Bahamas, a woman said. To them, we are not human. Even though their music sounds like ours, their people look like ours, even though we have the same African fathers who probably crossed these same seas together. And for me, that was just so powerful because I think when we look out across the diaspora or we get so caught up in like nationhood or I'm from America and I'm from here but it's as if when you look out, you should see your cousin, right? And there's so many times I've traveled and it's just like when I see black people, I'm like, there's someone in Chicago I know who looks just like that, right? So I think we don't see the connection or just the familialness with each other that we should. And I think for that reason, the diaspora continues to bleed and be in pain. And I think that was a huge piece here. I don't know if you made that connection or if you had any thoughts.
I did make that connection of pain, and I also I thought this is a part that I came back to after reading Caroline's Wedding, because Caroline married somebody from the Bahamas.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was thinking about that, and that is a reason why I kept coming up, like as we move further from Haiti in space, and then all like physical space, like coming to America, but then also like the generations going down, like we're losing things, if that makes sense. Like we're losing pieces of tradition and pieces of culture. And it made me think a lot, especially like in the mother's like distress of, I'm sorry, we're not even in that story yet, but maybe I'll come back to that. But yeah,
Yeah.
this is a part that I came back to.
Okay.
So I did connect that pain.
And one more, the last piece that I would like to mention for this one is just women always being the sacrilege or the sacrifice. I felt that was here, right? So many times we see the mother on the boat, right? We see the lover who's left behind. We see the neighbor's mother who's actually killed, right? They've already taken so much from her, but then they have to take her from herself as well, right? And when the mother is like, the other mother is like, we have to do something, the man literally restrains her and like, we can't, right? So it's the question of like, how are we revering and protecting the women in these situations as well? Because I feel like all these stories are about women, but then it's also about pain. So it's how are we showing up for each other? And that was a difficult situation because honestly, what do you do, right? I won't say there's no right or wrong. It depends on your perspective, but you would have lost in that situation, right? Had she gone over, it would have been another loss of life. Um, but then, so that becomes a question of like, is it worth the sacrifice?
Yeah, and then going back to your idea of like protection, like when the daughter learns that her dad, actually paid to save her own life,
Uh,
like this pain that the father goes around because he doesn't have his money, he doesn't have his land because he was saving his daughter.
yeah,
Then yeah, just like what could have, been the right
exactly.
like what could have been. Yeah, that's a really fascinating question.
Yeah, and
um
I think that again and again throughout the book, right? Like,
yeah, yeah, and especially on this story.
this one, I think it was a good one to start with for sure. Um,
it
it set
it
the
drew
tone. Hmm?
it drew me in. I started this on the beach with my mom, actually. I was like, okay, here we go.
The first story, it really like it shakes you, and I think it roots you as well, as far as what things will see throughout the rest of the book. So, absolutely. All right, our second story. Or did you have any thoughts on the first one?
No, I hit pretty much everything.
1937. All right, what did you think about this story?
So this story had a lot of elements of religion and spirituality.
Mm-hmm.
And so I actually did like a little, like very brief research on just like what religion looks like in Haiti. And I saw like it was like 80 something percent Christianity. So this story was rough for me. I think a big part of why was the daughter visiting mom, like very religiously, like I'm gonna go visit mom today, tomorrow, etc., but not talking to her until like the very end. Um, it was also pretty rough to like read about the mother's mother who was murdered in that river, which comes back later.
Yes.
What else do I have? This Madonna statue. Is somebody trying to?
Yes, like asking. Krik,
Okay.
Krak, Danticat.
And then also this idea of loose skin. So
Mm,
like the mother is in this prison and she's starving. She's slowly like losing more and more of her like, size,
oh,
and her
yeah.
skin is becoming loose, and the guards are intimidated by this woman who they have restrained in a prison, who is literally living off of bread and water and whatever her daughter brings her. They're still intimidated by this woman. And just what does that look like? Like a woman being restrained in a prison, but still being a threat to the people who are containing her.
Ah, that's so important and was such a key moment. Because for me, I really thought about that was all of these powerful women have been in prison and they've been accused of using witchcraft and black magic, right? So for me, it's why is it whenever you have women who are in these strong positions of power and authority and they're doing things to uplift themselves, it's always rooted to something like dark and mystical, right? So that was really huge for me. And I agree with you as well. And I think this was one of the stories that was the most politically driven, right? So you had one thing she said was the Americans taught us how to build prisons. And I think that when we think about what's currently happening in Haiti, I don't think you can actually conceptualize it without fully understanding the role that America has played, right? So from using them for their resources to just sending the military, right? Just things we've done to occupy the land, and then how we take a step back and we have like clean hands of it all. So I think this was her most political story of the book, which is what I really appreciated about it. To what you were mentioning about religion, for her to always have the Madonna, right? For this to be what like linked them, and then the Madonna cried. That was like the initial line. Today, my Madonna cried. For me, it was like, what do I do with that? Like for me, that was so emotionally heavy. Because I'm not Catholic, right? That's not my religion at all. But understanding the significance of that. And then as the story continues, we actually learn that the mother created it in such a way that it would cry, right? So what is she passing on to her daughter, and what does her daughter have to hold on to? So as the mother continues to like be in prison and to lose herself, she's still there with her daughter trying to send a message without saying it. And I think for me, the most powerful point of that coming home was the older woman when she goes to get the daughter, right? And she's saying that like, I'm, I have been sent for you. And she's like, well, how do I know who you are? And they have these questions. They have
Yeah.
knowingness, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you are really of my own, then you will be able to answer truthfully and honestly. And I thought that was so powerful with the theme of home, right? And what does that mean to be connected to Haiti, to be connected to the roots? So even if she loses her mother, she still has a connection to what her mother was a part of. So she doesn't really lose herself, even though it would have been so easy to at that point. Um, I guess one final thing for me too was she doesn't say the Dominican Republic here, right? Like for a very long time until the end of the book, and she finally says it, and she lost her mother in that river, and when she crossed the river, she was pregnant with her own daughter, right? So for me, I just think all of it still connects. So there's so much happening in Haiti right now, right? So I think that in that moment, again, it's just the pain of the diaspora, right? We were both colonized, we were both enslaved. The thing that separates you from me is who we were enslaved by, right? I was enslaved by France, you were enslaved by Spain, right? But we don't see each other. And I think that juxtaposed with the fact that there was this village or community of women who saw themselves in each other and lifted each other up when everything else was against them was super powerful for me. So yeah.
That's
Yeah.
deep.
It was a lot.
Yeah, and this also, like, this story kind of goes back to water. So even the Madonna crying, even though that is wax, and then also like talking about that massacre river,
Yeah.
like Haiti being surrounded by water, and what does that mean? And there was one other point that I didn't jot down, but I wanted to. So this story talked about how the mother was carried away.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so she was okay. I found it. Yeah, so her face was bleeding from the pounding blows of rocks and sticks. She was being pulled along by two policemen, each tugging at one of her arms as she dragged her feet. The women who had been staying with her carried her dead son by the leg. Is that? Yeah.
Yeah.
That was that was hard to read. That was really hard to read, and it goes back to what you're saying, like this pain that's happening to these women, whether that is the physical, like shaving of her head, her slowly, starving because she's eating bread and water, and then also like being separated from her daughter finding out that her mother is in prison by like coming out, and her mother being dragged away, like
I think the trauma of it too, and it's so. I think that's why I love books so much because I feel as if so many answers are there and we don't seek them all the time. But I think when we think of the current state of the U.S., especially with our incarceration system, and so much of what's lost, right? And we often talk about what's taken away from families, and we see that here, right? We often talk about not having the father in the home, but the impact on this young girl of not having her mother and then having to go visit her mother, right? And there's nothing you can do to save her. And the only thing you can do is try to take her food that even the mother's description of the food, right? She's like, it was what, a sandwich? And she's like, oh, this will last for weeks. What?
and puts it in her pocket.
Yes.
And then
yeah.
oh, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
My final point was the pillow. The pillow that was a pillow because of her hair.
Yeah.
I just like what kept her head, what she got to lay on her head or lay her head down on was coming from her. Like nothing was really given to this woman. Like she had to get from her daughter who experienced this trauma, wasn't even talking, for most of the story. And then the only type of real comfort that she could get was like her Madonna coming to her and her, touching her Madonna, and this pillow as they're shaving her head, so she can resemble a man to them. That was powerful to me.
The womanist in me wants to take that conversation and just run with it, but that would be an entirely different just conversation all on its own. But just masculine. Yeah, it was a lot. It was absolutely a lot there. Just so much emotion. I thought it was beautiful. It was a good second story for sure, but it doesn't get lighter. Unfortunately, it just keeps getting heavier.
Yeah, definitely.
So then we go into story 3, A Wall of Fire Rising. And I know you had a lot of thoughts on this one.
Yeah, this was my I came back to this story quite a lot. Yeah. Do you want to describe it before I like jump in and say what I felt?
Okay, so this is the story I actually remember when I said I don't feel like we would have a Roxane Gay or Marlon James without Edwidge Danticat. This is a story where I so clearly saw her influence on Roxane Gay. So I don't know if you've ever read Difficult Women.
I have
Or
not.
it's a series, it's a short stories book from Roxane Gay, and she has a story in here that's kind of similar. One there that's kind of similar. So in this one, we have a father, a son, and a mother. And we have, it's essentially when I think of dreams deferred. So we have a father who doesn't come from an affluent family. He's really trying to show up for his family by taking jobs that he doesn't really love. However, it's clear that he wants more. But we have a son, and that he's learning the speech for school, and it keeps coming up again and again. He's learning the speech for school, and he gets saying it, and then he has moments where he forgets the speech, and it feels heavy, even though you're not exactly sure in the moment how it connects, but it's clear in the end. And then you also have a wife who is trying to hold the family together by being there for her husband, but also supporting her son. But she also feels and knows that her husband has dreams that is outside of the family unit. So I think everyone in this story is grappling with how do they find identity, how do they have safety, but then also how are they as a collective. So that's really, yeah, what I got from the story.
Yeah. So, one of my big themes from this entire collection, but specifically this story, was sugar and the power of sugar. And so in this story, the sugar mill is the thing that Guy, the father, is trying to find, trying to get work on. I think he's like way down the list of becoming a permanent worker, and he gets temporary work there. And that's, giving him money to provide for his family. It's also the place that they visit to watch the news. Sugar is, I believe Guy said at one point, it was probably one of the first things that he like consumed in life, like his sugared water. And another part was when the family were going through rougher times, whether they didn't have money or they didn't have food, they boiled sugarcane pulp.
Yeah.
To try to, help them with their hunger.
Mm-hmm.
So it was just like the power of sugar. And the sugar mill part was so interesting to me because he's working to try to be a permanent worker on this sugar mill, which is providing, money for his family. But like you mentioned, he wanted more. He sought out more. And I think like the sugar mill for me was just kind of like this power that was kind of within reach, but wasn't within reach. And then also the people that owned it, who also owned the hot air balloon, like something that within reach, but then also like to what cost? And eventually, Guy dies. He jumps from the hot air balloon, which was really sad. And there's this part in the story that I really love. It's like Guy is basically talking about how he deserves to be in the sugar mill. He deserves to work for the sugar mill. And I thought that this, because like sugar being connected to Haiti, and sugar plantations, and just how people are actually fighting to have like a permanent job in this mill. Like, I don't know, what were your thoughts? I mean,
He was so important, but also just to think of the fact, because there was a point when he's trying to sign his son up for it, right?
mm-hmm.
I feel like I don't want my son subjected to that. I want him to be able to dream and have whatever life he desires. But the husband absolutely wants the son to be there and for him to be there as well, right? But then to think about the fact that years before, this is what you were enslaved to do, right? So you're fighting to be repositioned into a place that you literally, your country liberated yourself from. So for me, that was super powerful, especially because you have a son who's learning the speech for this play, who's consistently saying, give me liberty or give me death, right? And that's what we see here with the father eventually as well. It's just, okay, before we get to that conclusion, it was the father's conversation with the mother where he's saying, I have to get on a hot air balloon. I know I can run it. I know I can do it. I just have to get away. I want to go to a place and start over. And the mother is asking, okay, but can we come with you? Right? Can we come with you?
Mm-hmm.
And okay, you don't want me to go, but now you want to come. And she just responds with, I just want to know if your dreams of liberation include us. Right? That was so powerful for me.
Yes, and he never answers.
He did not answer. And eventually we see that they kind of didn't.
Yeah,
So
yeah, definitely. That is something that I want to.
yeah, I wonder how you felt during that scene, right? When he eventually is on the hot air balloon and we see him floating away. Like, do you feel as if the father made the right decision? And also, just what did you feel within your body reading that part?
So let me find this spot.
Song of Solomon, yeah, absolutely.
So before that ever happened,
Mm-hmm.
Guy asked the question, "How do you think a man is judged after he?"
Yeah.
That right there kind of clued me in to some extent that his idea of liberation did not include his family, did not include his wife or his son. And so when I saw him, or when I read that he was in this hot air balloon, flying over, there was this piece of me that was like, rooting for him. Like,
Mm-hmm.
yes, you're free. You're free from this mill that you need to work at, but you don't necessarily want to work at. Like this really weird, like cognitive dissonance with like, I need this job, but like, I don't want this. But then I also was like, but his family, but his son, but his wife. And even though he kind of answered the question without answering the question, because when she asked, he never answered, right? He never answered. And then his next thing that he said to her was actually that question. And so it was very conflicting to me. And then when he jumps to like take flight, that was like, whew,
Yeah.
to fly, and then ironically, not ironically, he lands right beside his family.
Okay. So during that moment, what I really thought about was his expression when he discussed his father, right? Because at first, I don't remember much of my father. Actually, I do. I recall my father being a man that I didn't have no desire to be, right? So I felt torn in that moment because you do land right by your son and your wife, right? So on one hand, it's like, okay, your family has seen that they can have liberation, whether momentarily or not, right? But then at the same time, you've abandoned them. So what message are you sending to your son? So I felt very conflicted because on one hand, you're right. I was rooting for him to have this freedom and liberation, even if just for a moment. But then it's like, but look at the damage you're doing in the process.
Yeah.
Right?
And then going back to that, like liberation for a moment, to what extent? Like
Exactly.
what is going to happen with that liberation for a moment? And in his case, it was, not good. I also wanted to like touch on the part where the son is saying he's saying the speech for the first time. And then like the next part was saying like, it's a speech written by a European man,
Yes.
right? That might have sent the real like man turning in his grave. And
Mm-hmm.
that part really touched me. I think like language has always been something super interesting to me. um and the language that I speak, and the two, like, so I speak a little Spanish and I speak English. That's my native language. And I love the English language. I love language, I love literature. But there's also this part of me that's like, this is the language of my colonizers, this, and um so this boy, while speaking about freedom, is also speaking not only in the language, but in the phrasing of his colonizers.
Even, okay. So as you're saying that, I have two things. One, what immediately comes to mind is Salt by Nayyirah Waheed. And she just talks about how there's only one way to say I love you in English, but in her language, there's so many, right? And just how limited English is. So I've been learning Spanish for years. I'm currently learning Yoruba, and I just think of in some ways, so for instance, in learning Spanish, yeah, I'm learning Spanish because I want to speak with other people across the diaspora, but even in learning Spanish, I'm still learning the language of the colonizer, right? Because I'm not speaking what the Tainos spoke, right? So grappling with that, grappling with English, but there's a feeling that comes over me when I'm having my Yoruba lessons that's spiritual, that I cannot place, right? I feel more connected in learning that language than I have in any other language. And it's, I think for me, it's in knowing that I can go and take back something that was taken from me, right? So that comes back here because that's what he was trying to do. It's just, I want to take back the freedom that I haven't been able to have. So it was really, yeah, this was a very powerful story, but it also just causes you to question again and again, what's the right answer? And I think about that often. So this question like keeps me up at night was just, how do we find liberation, right? Because there's so many different ways and there's been so many different revolutions and they haven't succeeded yet, right? So just questioning and thinking through what's the right answer. And it's, I don't know, I don't have it right now. I'm still searching for it, but this story really made me think of that.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you have anything else to add?
No, only just the owner of the meal and the hot air balloon. His
Yes.
reaction or the lack thereof, it was really hard to read. But what did he feel? And he was on this land of these people, but even in watching him, like watching the father, watching the whole experiment, it was really from a place of, this is kind of annoying rather than I feel like a connection. It's like why he may have done it, or I have a deep desire to know why he would have done it. He was more amused by like, how did he do that? That usually takes an entire team. And for me, that spoke volumes about being on someone's land and observing their culture, but still just more so occupying it instead of actually becoming familiar and close. So I didn't have a lot to say about that, just things that I see playing out in modern day again and again. Yeah.
Yeah. I didn't have anything to add to that, but that is the point.
Yeah. Oof. Night women. What a good one. You want to get a synopsis of Night Women?
Yes. So, Night Woman is basically the story of a woman, a night woman, who she's young. She's 25 years old. She has a young son, and she basically does her work while her young son sleeps, waiting for angels. And there's this like the conflict of this is, her son growing and getting older, her trying to, in some ways, I feel like preserve his innocence.
Mm-hmm.
And what is it going to look like the day that he, wakes up and sees that? She already has like an idea of what she's going to say, but, things never really go as you plan. And religion definitely, I feel like, was a really big theme of this story. It came back a few times. Do you have anything to add?
Yeah. So for me, I think that's a great just overview. But for me, this one for me was the song that felt most like music. Like it felt like a blues song almost to me, and hearing it, and just the way in which she's torn between two worlds essentially, right? She has her life at night, but then she sees the women during the day, and she's grateful that she doesn't have to live that life, even though it's not clear that she's completely satisfied with the nightlife she has either. I think she's just really trying to survive for her son. And for me, it was also about liberation, right? In the sense that she chooses this life. So a little off topic, but I just think back to when I first used to go to like certain like entertainment places, and you would see women like dancing, and I would always get really sad because I would like, I wonder if she's like happy or if she's uncomfortable, or just I would be thinking the entirely wrong things that you're thinking in that moment. But then also just if you flip that perspective, right? Of but I get to choose what I want to do with my body. And in order for you to see it, you have to pay, right? And so in that sense, you do have autonomy. So that was the same question I was grappling with here. just what perspective do you see it from? Because on one hand, it's like, oh, this is so unfortunate. But on another hand, there are these men. She has what, 3 men? And they have their schedules, right? So she gets to control when they come. She gets to control when they leave, right? And she has a certain amount of control over what she tells her son. But then I think about the fact that he's growing, and the lie that she wants to tell of like, this is an angel of your father who's come back to visit us. Just how would that go over? So I guess I think about generational trauma and what we intentionally do to each other and trying to play it safe, but also doing harm as well. Yeah.
This story in particular made me think of bodies, specifically Black bodies, and the freedom that we have with them, and then also like the history of not having freedom with our bodies. And so there was one instance where the mother had like an antidote, I believe, and she was thinking of her son who snuck like some type of candy or some type of sweet, and thinking like, oh, his teeth will turn black, and he doesn't know that one day a woman like me will judge him. Also, her work, is using her body. And back to what you said, like, there's freedom because it's her choice, but then, who's to say if she had maybe freedoms in other situations, would that still be her choice? Would that still be something that she would choose for herself? We don't know. And then, I thought it was really interesting that she looked at her son, like she kissed him. She knew like when he was actually asleep, and she knew that there would be a day like where she would have to talk about love with him, about pleasure with him. That was really interesting to me, because I was thinking like, this is a woman who, makes her living off of love, off of making like pleasure. And so, like, what would that conversation look like, in the future? I also really liked that this story was a mother and a son rather than a mother and a daughter. I feel like that completely changes the dynamic. What were your thoughts about that?
I absolutely agree. I think that's a harder one to grapple with in some ways, right? Because in one sense, she's trying to protect her son, but also you have to deal with the reality at one point. I'm going to make it a little personal, right? So I don't have kids, but I have nephews. And I grapple with that a lot because I don't want my nephews to grow up to be men that I don't like, right? So I think of that when I think of this mother-son connection, right? So in one sense, she's trying to keep him innocent, but she's saying that one day you'll have to impress a woman like me. But then it makes me think of the last story, because it's a woman like you who you actually want for your son, right? So just the levels here, because what will you say to him? And eventually he will realize what you're doing, right? So how will you root that conversation? I think there's a way that you can have it, right? But it requires a different level of vulnerability and honesty that I don't think that she even has acknowledged with herself. So how do you admit the truth to someone else when you're, one, trying to protect them, and two, you haven't even grappled with the full understanding of it yourself? So that's what I'm feeling.
And then a last point that I wanted to bring up about this story was space. Space came back to me. The fact that this woman, she does her work so close to where her son is sleeping. And then the fact that the work that she does, having sex with these men, they're on her, you know what I'm saying? And she's looking at the stars because her roof is not, it's open. And so like her, like, what am I trying to say? Just the idea of space and like how I imagine from my own perspective how that can feel kind of restrictive, like to have this body on you, to have your son's body so close to you, but you're looking up, literally looking up into space. Yeah,
Yeah.
space was just such a big theme for me. I
Right.
don't know.
Yeah. And just, yeah, the veil, because the veil comes up again, right? But it's this limited veil that, so it's, what are you actually hiding? Right? What does he actually know? And she does have her rhythm, but that was a big piece as well of like, how much does he actually know? And one last piece I had about this is just like Edwidge Danticat's influence and why I think people should read her more. So Marlon James has A Book of Night Women that it's clearly, so clearly influenced by this. So that's just my push for people to read more Edwidge Danticat. But that's it. Okay. Our next one. Ooh, I had a lot of feelings about this piece. Between the pool and the gardenias. All right. So this is a story about a woman who is having a very hard time carrying children full term. She's had a ton of miscarriages, and eventually she leaves the town. Her husband has had a ton of kids with other women, let's just say that. So all of this is weighing on her. Eventually she leaves the town and she goes to a smaller town. And here she actually finds a child, and it feels almost like the universe is aligning for her. She sees this child. At first she's a little worried because she's like, maybe one of my enemies has done this so that it's a curse on me. But eventually she takes the child, she takes it home with her. She is a service woman. And she works in this home. She has the child with her. The child never cries. So it seems to be like just a very peaceful child. It seems to be, again, just universally aligned. And then eventually we realize this very dark, horrible secret about the child. And for me, that was, I remember like kind of screaming out loud at that point. Um, but before I get into my thoughts, just curious, like, what were your feelings reading this one?
It was hard. That that's it. No, I was kidding. Like it was rough. So this is another one that I read twice because I didn't pick up about the child like not being alive um originally until I didn't pick it up until about the smells. So that was pretty much close to the end of it. Um and so I had to reread it, and in fact when I reread it I noticed that the third sentence, her lips were wide and purple, like
Mm-hmm.
those African dolls you see in tourist store windows, but can never afford to buy.
Yeah.
That is almost like an identical description of the child in the first story.
Yep.
Um, and so my thoughts about this were grief,
Mm-hmm.
like specifically the woman like losing the children that she was conceiving, um losing her husband to other women and he was having children that weren't her children, and that was something that she clearly wanted for herself. And in fact, like losing Rose, even though she had Rose for such a short period of time, she built a connection with Rose. Rose was her baby, and then Rose had, to go and be buried eventually. Um, and then there was one other thing that I got from this. Um, can you mind jumping in? I'm gonna see if it comes back to me.
Good. For me, it was also just, so for me, I think Edwidge Danticat, just her use of language. So just the way in which she described the miscarriages was very just emotionally heavy for me. Like they were rejecting her body. And I know a lot of people who've gone through miscarriages feel that way. So it was just her ability to create these images and imagery. And then also a desire for love. Because not only did she desire to have this child to love her, right? So this is almost like her worst dreams come to life, right? She's had all these miscarriages. Now she has a physical child, and the child is actually dead, right? So it's almost like a physical stillbirth that never happened. But also the fact that she keeps being betrayed again and again in seek of love. So her husband is having children with other women, and then also she has I won't even say affair. She has a one night stand with the gardener who she doesn't know his name, and inevitably he is the one who turns her in because he doesn't see her, right? So I think that we talked about here taking up space, but I also think visibility. No one sees her. Even when she has this child and she's taking it to the market, she's like, I didn't have a child yesterday. I have a child today, and no one noticed that I have a child. So no matter what she does, she can't get her desires, and she can't get the world to see her as she is. But she keeps striving and keeps trying, and she keeps having to be betrayed at some point she's going to be physically imprisoned because her lover has turned her in. So now it's as if all of her worst aspirations are being personified, because now she's been in a prison within herself, but she's actually now going to be in prison for trying to be loved and have love. So that's what I took from this. It's almost ridiculous that, yeah.
Yeah, that is really, yeah, a really big thing to take from this. I'm thinking now, like, as you were speaking, of what you said about, like, one day she didn't have a child, another day she did, and how, you know, she talked to Rose, you know, she wanted to comfort Rose, and she kind of like created this almost fantasy of like the home that she was working in being her home, and her home, like that, you know, like almost like I felt like to some extent this woman didn't feel good enough, you know what I mean? And she didn't feel like she was enough. And I can imagine, like, or I can't really imagine, but I too know, like, I have friends and I have people that have had miscarriages, and like that feeling of my body is not good enough. It's my fault. Did I do this too much? Did I do that? Did I not do this? Not to mention her husband going out doing what he doing. This man, this gardener, who sleeps with her and then like doesn't even give her the time of day after, and in fact, like you said, turns her in. And then this baby that she does get, but this baby is in fact, you know, dead. Like, what does that feel like? I was trying to like step into what would that feel like, you know? And like there was just like, I just couldn't judge her. I just couldn't imagine what that is like all of these different elements of seeking out love and seeking out a child,
Yeah.
and that's still being taken away from you. Yeah, it was painful.
It was a painful one. Yeah. It wasn't one of my favorite ones, but I felt like it had a lot there.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah. Yes.
The size is appropriate. The size is appropriate. The missing piece. I love the fact that piece is spelled P-E-A-C-E. The missing piece. All right. Can you give just an overview of this one?
Yes. So this is the one that I have like the least amount of notes, so it's gonna come back from me. But this one starts with a young girl who is with a man who I believe he used to be like in the military, and then he got hurt. But a big part of this is that she lives with her grandmother, and there's also a journalist. Is that the story? Yeah, so there is a journalist in this story who is trying to go and find her own. Is this not it?
No,
Oh,
yeah.
okay. I was making sure. So this journalist came to find her own mother, I want to say. And this young girl like knows how to get there, and she in fact knows that the secret word is peace. And so she goes with her after like lying to grandmother and, you know, sneaking out. And this woman, this journalist, I forget like her nationality, but it's just causing issues, like that like puts their lives at danger, which I did not like. And it basically ends with so this is the young girl who her mother died like giving birth to her, And so like her name was a translation of death. And so at the end, she asked her grandmother to call her by her mother's name.
That was so heavy for me. But before we get there, I agree about the journalist or the reporter who's there, and she's so gung ho on finding her mother that she's okay. So two things are happening. One, she feels as if she's fighting against the war that's happening right there. Right, she has her own personal resistance. This is her way of resisting, not considering the fact that she's putting this young girl's life at risk. Right? So that bothered me because on one hand, I guess that was again that's a theme here of like what's the right decision. It's all messy and complicated. So on one hand, I absolutely get it. You want to find your mother. You want to take her home with you. You're quilting this quote that she started, right? Because you're trying to hold on to this memory of her. And that was also very powerful for me too, because once she finishes the quote, it's already coming apart at the seams, right? So is what you're building on, is what you're holding on to actually as deeply rooted as you believe? Right? Or what else are you trying? Like, what else is it rooted in? And she was of Haitian descent, but I believe she lives in America now, right?
Yeah,
So,
an American accent. Yeah.
yeah, again, that of being in a place but not being connected to it, right? Because you come in with this bravado of Americanness without actually rooting yourself in what's the context here, what's happening here, right? How can I ensure that I get what I want and ensure that others are safe, especially this child? So that was one thing that stuck out for me. The other piece, well, I guess also because she's trying to heal her inner child, but you are also subjecting an outer child to danger. So that was big for me. And then finally, she does tell her she should take her mother's name, right? Like, oh, you shouldn't let them call you deaf. You should take on your mother's name. And eventually, the young girl does go into her grandmother, call me by her name, right? She doesn't say what it is. She doesn't say, call me my mother's name. Call me by her name. And I can tell it's very emotionally heavy for the grandmother, but I was confused for the young girl as well because this isn't an idea that came to her organically or from her own being, right? So my question at the end of it was this true freedom for her, or is she just now being subjugated to another name that is not her own? Right? So you go from your life is still all about your mother. I think that was the piece I walked away with. So is that freedom? And if so, then what does it actually mean? And I didn't have an answer to that.
Yeah, that's nice. That didn't even come to mind. I was definitely there with thinking about this woman putting this young girl's life at risk. And even when danger was very present, like it was very present at a point, she's still pushing, and in fact the young girl is like begging her like, okay, like let's go. Still, like I'm like, oh my goodness. um Also, the woman using money, because I believe she used money to like get her to take her to this place.
Yeah.
And then outside of them, the fact that peace was no longer the password.
Yes.
I That was something that was significant to me. I don't know why. That's something that I'm still kind of pouring over, but just her trying to use peace, she said peace a few times actually, and it just, that young man was like, that
Please,
ain't it.
please stop saying peace.
Yeah. Right. um yeah, what were your thoughts about that?
I mean, obviously it was symbolic, right?
Yes.
Because she's at one point she's screaming it, right, with this gun with this man, sorry, who has a gun pointed at this woman, like, right, like what, play silly games and win silly prizes, and that was like she's trying to show her defiance, and the guy is actually like, okay, but this is the wrong place for that. So when the young girl is there screaming peace, the fact that no one is able to hear her, right? The woman she's trying to help, or the soldier who is, I won't say against them, but who is following his orders that y'all should all be in the house. So for me, with her screaming peace, it was just that, what is peace in the face of those who have no desire for it, right? It's kind of it makes me, while I'm standing now, it's making me think of No Church in the Wild, right? Like, what's a God to a non-believer, right? So what is peace when you're in front of people who have no desire for peace? And then what do you do with that? So I think more often than not, I walked away from this with like just deep ponderings that I don't actually have like immediate answers to.
Yeah. I think my final thought was the woman, Amelie, I believe, Amelie.
Mm-hmm.
She, so before they even got to the guards, she mentioned her American passport. Maybe that will help. That just makes me think of something that you said earlier in this discussion, like America's presence in Haiti and what that, like how that shapes their history. Um, and that's something that like I just was like, I mean, like the audacity, kind of like that's what came, like you're telling, not telling, or kind of telling this young girl who is from Haiti, who like this is her place. Oh, maybe this will help. You're the visitor, like, so it was just, and you need her too. So that's another thing, like you need her to get to this, but you're trying to suggest that your Americanness, some token of your Americanness
We'll
will
say,
be enough to save. Yeah,
uh,
like
yeah. And then let's talk about the fact that like she gets her to do all of this for money, right? But when they actually get back, she gives her like no money. The amount that she gives her was very minimal. And I was just like, oh, so many lovers, like you were saying, like the gall or just the audacity in this entire situation. So for me, again, it was like to be in it, but not of it. Like there was no true connection there. So yeah. Yep. Uh, okay, so I didn't have much for the next story, seeing things simply. I feel like a lot was happening, but I did not have a lot of thoughts about it.
yeah, this was a lot. um yeah, this was the painting one, right?
Mm, yeah.
Yeah.
So we have
um,
to go ahead.
do you want to still like summarize it?
Yes. Yeah. So like we
um
have. Oh, go ahead. You
I'm
got
sorry.
it. Go ahead.
I was just gonna say it's a young woman who is being painted by, or being a French woman is painting her, um sometimes nude, sometimes outside, sometimes inside. She passes a cockfight, and she sees an old man who every time he sees her, he's like commenting on her beauty, and then he sees her the second time and it's like twice in one day, like da da da. And this man also has a wife that he's trying to like put spells on.
To keep away from him so she can stay away from him. Go ahead.
Yes. What else? Catherine, who is the painter, at one point later on in the story goes back to France like unannounced,
Yeah.
because her mentor passed, and then she comes back. Yeah, this story was like kind of, I don't know, for me too.
So when I think of this one though, one thing you were saying was thinking of privilege, right? So the old man who is in this town, right? He does have a big role in the story, but I think it's an important one. So he's doing these spells, trying to keep his wife away from him. And it's clear that him and his wife come from two different classes originally, right? They make reference to the fact that she's carrying things on her head, which is supposed to show that she's lower in like the financial status. And they're saying that he was in the city before, and he's obviously only there now to get drunk and basically die, right? Is what it seems. And then you have this French woman who is there, who is observing or drawing or painting the body of this young Haitian girl in exchange for class, right? Or in exchange for cash. So for me, I guess the question of the privilege of it all, because you're coming in, whether you're a citizen or from outside, and you're using these people for your gain, right? Only in the way that it benefits you. So I think that was a big theme, and it just made me think about just again kind of what you were saying before, just like how often Haiti is used on a number of ways for its resources, whether on a big scale or a small scale. It made me think of that as well. And then also just what's the meaning of life, right? I think that was a big question. Like, what does it all mean? Um, and yeah, again, I didn't have the answer to that directly, but that was a big question. Like, what is the meaning of life? The young girl, she had no dreams beforehand. Now she kind of has some. So, does her being like, is that the cost you pay for being used? It's like, oh, now hopefully I'll have some aspirations in life. I don't know, but it's kind of a thought that I had. Yeah.
Yeah. And then those dreams kind of, or that maybe a goal is very much related to like what the person who's using you is using you for.
Exactly.
Um, I think one of my takeaways from this was her getting her self portrait,
Mm-hmm.
um, and how like she originally was like is this really me? And then like as she like starts to see herself, she's like, oh yeah, this is me.
Yeah.
Um, and then like the time where Catherine is in France and she's like in her home walking around and just kind of observing for like a week, I think.
Yes.
I don't know exactly what I got, but I space comes to mind. Her being able to kind of just walk the ground, not walk the grounds, but walk the home and walk around the home without like any obligation to pose for
Yeah.
this one. Yeah, that's about it for me.
I think one last piece for me, and we can move on, was also it went back to the first story of the human desire to be immortalized, right? The man wanted his name written down, and then she has this painting, and it's as if she can finally see herself because she wants it to go into posterity, right? She can pass this on. It's like, I was here. So I think that is just another thing we see as well. But again, a story that seemingly had a lot of meaning, but that's how I felt about it. All right. Our next one, New York Day Women. I really like this story, actually. So here we have a mother who goes off and she has this entirely different life than her daughter knows. She has her home life and then she goes out and she's a nanny in New York. But in seeing her mother in New York, the young woman realizes that her mother just has a completely different life that she knows nothing about. And it made me ponder on the fact of like, do any of us really know our elders? And do we take advantage of the knowledge and information that they may have? So again, it was just across generations and like not necessarily generational trauma, but what we lose. And not only the more we move away from our home country or our home place, but also the more we move away from a revering of those who came before us. Yeah. Who knows?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, I did have thoughts. I really enjoyed this. I really enjoyed this story. I think the repetition was my favorite part. Like, my mother who, my mother who, my mother who. There's so much revealed about this woman, and it's all from the point of view of the daughter. Um, so that was something. I also thought about, because now we're in New York, we're no longer in Haiti, so we are a bit removed
Yeah.
from Haiti. And then I thought it was really interesting that, this daughter is like my mother who doesn't leave Brooklyn, but you see her in some other part of New York, and in fact, with a young white kid. Um, and
But can we stop there for a second? Because
yeah,
that's big for me because that made me think about what. Okay, so two things. One, so this is obviously a direct opposite of the night women, right? So this is the day women, and she's chosen a different life. But when you see her with the kid, just thinking about the kindness that she's showing to this child that her own daughter doesn't get, right? And why is that? So that was just a question that I had. Like, and as the daughter, how does that make you feel?
yeah. That's definitely a question that came up for me as well. Um, I would say, like, I didn't think of it as so much as kindness as like attention. I
Okay.
think, like, I thought about it a lot as like kind of the attention that
Yeah.
mom giving this young kid that is not hers. So the act of going and getting the soda and
Mm.
giving the little kid the soda, the act of getting just, I think one point the daughter describes it like looking like when the mother is with some other women, how they kind of look like a parent teacher, like, or some type of association. What she said, the third world parent teacher
Yeah.
association. That's what she said.
Yeah.
That really stuck out to me because at the end, she said, my mother, who never went to any of my parent teacher association meetings when I was in school, she never directly says what it feels like for her, but you can kind of predict what it feels like to actually take the time to walk around for an hour following your mother without her knowing, and you seeing her do these very intentional things, getting a soda pop for the young kid, playing with them just for an hour, like doing all of this for an hour of time. It was just like, oh,
You know what this is actually making me think about? I don't know if you've read it. I'm reading it right now. I haven't finished, but The Secret Lives of Church Ladies.
I have
Um,
not, but that is on my list.
okay. So it's one of the stories in there, and one of the things she says is that she doesn't let her daughter do certain things because she's like, if I let her taste the sweetness of life, because she can't have it. So if I let her taste the sweetness of life, she'll be so happy with it that she'll, as an adult, she will like sacrifice herself in order to have a taste of it or something, or just to be close to it. So it made me think of that only here because so what we show others, but what we hold back from our own children in an attempt to protect them, right? But it's actually doing more damage. So it's like you're going off and you're taking care of these kids to have additional money, right? So that you can show up for your kids or forever on the home front. And I'm sure you think that like I'm being harder on her. She's going to grow and she's going to become this entire person. She has a good job in the city, we can presume. And at the same time, by taking care of someone else's child, you're missing the key moments of your own, but you're doing it in order to ensure that she has a decent life. So what do you do with that? That should be the title for this review. What do you do with that, right?
Yeah. Um, and then one of your questions, like that you mentioned earlier, that kind of drove how you view this book is like, what is the right way to do something? Like, and then what are the consequences? Because, your idea of what is right is, how you view things. And so something I did get from this is while I felt, because we were in the daughter's point of view a lot of the time, we kind of feel like her loneliness, and at least I felt her like kind of sadness of seeing that. But then I also like picked up like little pieces of mom like showing attention and to some extent kindness, but in her own way that maybe like wasn't what the daughter wanted,
Right.
right? Wasn't the way that she wanted to, but it was the way that the mom knew how to, or the way the mom chose to. So the instance of sewing the lace collars on the softball company, that takes time.
It does. It does.
Like, she doesn't have to do that. Or, having the little dolls for if the daughter ever had kids.
Yeah.
Um, the never going to the parent teacher conferences, but then also saying, because like, I know you're good. I know you're good anyway, like
That's hard
it,
though. Yeah.
it's like, yeah, like it's like, because it's evident to, or it seems evident to me that that's not what Suzette wanted.
Right.
That's not what the daughter wanted.
Yeah.
But that was what the mother gave. And so you can kind of see it from both perspectives. I can kind of see it from both perspectives. It's a really fascinating story for me. Like, very short, but
Yeah.
I took a lot from it.
Yeah, it was a lot there for sure to unpack. Not as much as the next one for me though.
Oh yeah. Yeah, this is the longest one. Yeah.
Yeah, it was a lot there. We kind of touched on it in the opening as well. Caroline's Wedding. You want to summarize it?
Can I give that one to you?
For sure. Right. So, we have Caroline. Oh, we have two sisters, actually. We have two sisters and we have a mother. And they are originally, well, the mother and father were originally from Haiti. The father has since transitioned. So you have this mother attempting to raise her two daughters. One daughter was born with half of an arm. And that becomes important because the mother is concerned that she's settling in life. But it's centered around that daughter getting married, and she's marrying a Bahamian. So he's a janitor at the school that the daughter works at, and the mother is having a really hard time with accepting the fact that he is not Haitian, that he is not following Haitian traditions as far as scouting her and impressing her really to get the hand of her daughter. So it's also, I think it's rooted in not only the fact that she's losing her daughter, right, which she feels is losing a part of herself, but the fact that she's also feeling further removed from home and tradition. And she has a daughter. She has two daughters, one who was born in Haiti, one who was born in America. So she and herself, with her daughter, she's kind of torn between two worlds. And she's grappling with accepting the fact that what she deems as the right way may not be the way that her daughters choose.
Yeah. Yeah. That was great. That was literally great. Yeah, this was definitely this, and then the additional one
Mm.
was the stories that really started to like make me think about like, you know, what is gained and what is lost from leaving like the home base. Um, and I really enjoyed this because you kind of got a taste of a little bit of everything in this story because mom is born in Haiti. The oldest daughter is born in Haiti, but goes to America and then eventually gets her American citizenship. And Caroline is born in America. And then like one of my like most memorable quotes, I have it like written down in my notes, is Caroline had been born in America, something that she very much took for granted. And there were some connections that, yeah, that's not even finished. That's not a finished thought. But yeah, thinking about that. And so I connected, and this is something I mentioned in the first story, Children of the Sea, how Caroline chose to marry Eric. But then in Children of the Sea, it talked about how like the people in Bahamas would treat Haitians terribly. Like, and so that was really interesting to me because I was like, this kind of feeds into this idea that I have of like what is gained and lost about like being more removed from Haiti, because like Caroline, she's Haitian, but she is the daughter of a woman who was born in Haiti, loves her country, but like also I think was mentioned like never went back.
Yeah.
Yeah, she had never been back.
Yeah. But she
And then
keeps.
also very much believed in those traditions,
Yes.
right? That
Yes.
Caroline did not.
Yes. Right. Yeah. Just even the chapel, right? She keeps going to hear these names, and Caroline's like, you don't even know these people, but it's her connection to home, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then we also get callbacks, right? So in this story, you hear like the name of like another boat has gone down, right? And it immediately takes you back to the first story. So I really appreciated that about the stories, how they connect. I think for me here, just again, memory. So with the question and answer game, right? The question game and you answer, and it was like, why is the thing that you lost always in the last place you look? And it's once you remember, you stop looking. And for me, it was immediately like home. Once you remember, you can stop searching, you can stop seeking. Because I feel as if that's what the mother wants for her daughters. She wants them to have the connection to tradition, to home, to Haiti, and what that meant for her. And one of the daughters kind of gets it, but the other one is just so far removed. So I think that was just powerful for me. In addition to just like the generational divides, and also what you believe may not be true, right? So that was big as well because the mother had a lot of thoughts about the fiance. But eventually she realizes that, like, oh no, this is right. This is the right decision. This is good for her. And I also find the fact of just humans, right? Because the moment Caroline leaves, she's like, oh, my sweet Caroline. And it's like, obviously she's immediately deified. Even though they had a very contentious relationship. So I think
Yes.
this was one that was very honest and vulnerable and complicated in the way that humans just are. And that's why I liked it. Yeah.
Yeah. I think I really liked, and I feel like with the mom and with Caroline, like they're very much highlighted in this story, but the sister, the older sister, who did they mention her name? I don't remember.
Oh.
I don't think I don't remember. If they did, I don't remember. But her, like, literally just her identity of being born in Haiti, but like growing up in America, and then like she's almost kind of like the middle ground. Like, she's trying to appease mom, but she's also there for Caroline. She's trying to like talk up Eric to mom,
Yeah.
but you know how mom is. Like, she's really like this identity of like this older daughter, like the older sibling.
Yeah.
And I found her so fascinating. Like, I felt like, like her choice to become an American citizen, and she's like, what this means to me, and like also like the idea of her like giving up her going to get her passport, and how she kind of felt almost naked when she gave up that certificate, like, and how important papers were to her. And it was just like, she was just so interesting to me, like just so interesting. um and then also her connection to her dad, and how in each dream she was trying, like, reaching him more and more, and then there was like a point where she was like, yo, is this even the version of dad that I want to reach?
Mm-hmm.
Like, she was so interesting to me,
Yeah.
like, just she read so interesting. She just came off the pages for me.
Yeah, I agree. And I did love the connect. So I love the connection to the father in the sense of acknowledging that we can be connected to the ancestors if we're only open to it. So remember that the mother is telling them to, like, wear red panties, make sure they stays away, and they don't. They wear black, right? To say that you're welcome here, and we still remember you. So that was very symbolic for me as well. Because again, just thinking about Salt, and she says, the only reason the ancestors whisper is because they don't want to scare you, right? So just tell them that they're welcome here. So it made me think of that as well, especially because in our society, I think we are taught to fear certain things, or we're taught that, like, once someone dies, that's it. But the fact that there's still connections to be made and we can tap into that, I thought was powerful. And I think it rooted her and helped her get back to home, because her father questions her, like, you don't remember how to play the game, right? Like, but it's not about the game, it's about memory. So I thought that was, yeah, important. I think that's one of my favorite stories from the entire book. I really like that one.
Yeah, this is one of my favorites too. Uh, let, let me see.
I think that was all I had for that. Just the call and response piece.
Yeah, and there were a few like call and response, because it talked about the great grandmother who was actually the one that was killed in like the Massacre River,
Um,
grandmother who died with a bald head in prison. Um, yeah, there was a lot
there's a lot.
there.
Yeah.
And then I have I have fertility in one of my notes.
Hmm.
Can't quite remember where
You were going with it.
that from, but in my notes I say like the worth that is placed on a woman's body if she's fertile, but then if she's not, it's like her worth kind of goes down.
Hmm.
I think that one definitely ties into Between the Pool story,
Yeah.
and I don't know why I have that under this story, but that's that I wanted to add.
No worries. Okay, so Women Like Us. I only have one line for this, so I don't know if you have more for that one. It's like
uh,
that's the original, like, epilogue.
yeah, so I the writing aspect. Like, I think for me, what I took away from this mostly was like when you write, it's like braiding your hair. It's like all these different connections, and like I felt like a child again, like sitting between your mom's legs, getting your hair braided, or getting ponytails or whatever. But then like the choice to be a writer, after everything that is mentioned, like on the third page of this story, where it's like, in our world, writers are tortured and killed if they're men, they're called whores, they're raped and killed if they're women. Like, knowing that and then still making the choice to write.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was kind of what I took away from it.
For me, it was ancestral memory beyond survival. So I think that the mother, for me here, when she thinks about memory, is very much rooted in what you were saying of, we need you to be something other than a writer, right? It's dangerous. We need you to be a nurse. We need you to be something we can be proud of. We need you to survive. We don't need you to take on this career that's going to place you in danger. But then once she finally like sits and she has this memory, it goes back beyond the memories connected to like danger and fear to like these powerful women, right? And so for me, it was that acknowledgement, or that recognizing that I can do this, and I can do this because it's been done before. So I think that was super, super, super powerful, and just a good way to end the book. Initially, did you have any other thoughts? Because I want to get into that.
Yeah, my final thought was just the braiding that kept coming up. I kind of took the braiding as like a symbolization of just kind of like interweaving the stories,
Yeah.
which was like my indicator, besides like the last story, that they were all connected in some ways. Even if I didn't like quite catch it,
Yeah.
they all were connected. And I kind of took that as like that being them, being the braid, them being the different strands to come together.
That makes sense. That makes sense. Okay.
And that's me.
Yeah. Okay. So now, I don't know if you'll feel this way. I have a personal beef when writers, it's usually like 20 years later, it's at least 10, but it's usually around the 20-year mark, where writers would come back, and I don't know if it's from the publishing companies when they re-release the book, but writers would either add something or change the story in some way, right? And I get so frustrated by that, because obviously as a creator, whenever you put something out in the world, you always think of ways that it could have changed or it could have been better, right? But I sometimes think it does such a disservice to the reader for you to go back and change it, right? Because they become invested in some way. So for this one, she adds a new story in the old days. And I wanted to like it. On some ways I did. I was like, oh, she's grown as a writer, right? I think that's always nice and cool to see the ways that like writers have matured. But I felt as if this story detracted so much from the book. But I guess we should say what the story is about first.
Yeah, I'll take that. So the story, to my understanding, is about a young woman who is living in New York with her mother, and her mother basically gets the call that that young woman's father, her previous husband, is dying. And so this young girl like had never met her dad, and so mom wanted her to travel back to Florida and see her dying dad. And she in fact does. She gets on the phone, she talks to dad's new wife. She goes back, she visits him. It's kind of like weird vibes. I don't know, like when she came into that house, and like the doctor and the priest and somebody else.
Yeah.
I got like Get Out vibes. But she does walk, and she gets to go in with her dad and see him, but he in fact like had died like right before she came in. And to some extent, like, and this is me kind of like going into my feelings now, but I felt like that was more for like wife and dad, or wife, because dad didn't even know, than her, because they wanted, like, I guess a tradition is for the eldest daughter to go in and to say when dad is dead, right? And so she does that. But like, what did she gain from that? Was like my question. What did she gain from this? Yeah.
Yeah. No, I think that's great. Before we get into it though, can we talk about that opening line? Because I felt like that could have been a completely different book. She says, what did she say? She calls and she says, "My husband is dying and he wants to spend time with you." Or so, like, so we don't even know at this moment in time that it's like her father. So for me, when I first read that, I was like, oh, this is a twist. And I immediately went to like romance.
Mm-hmm.
Like, could you fathom if someone's like, "Hey, my husband's dying, but he wants to spend some moments with you." So I just thought that was a great way to like immediately reel you in. But beyond that, I do want to read that story. I actually want her to write it, but that's not the story we got here. So I do feel as if, again, the question of tradition, right? So it is requested that the daughter come, but also just in this story, we get a very modern woman in her mother, right? Because her mother chooses to say like, "No, your father went back to Haiti, and yeah, I never told him, right? I said I was going to come, but then I didn't go because I found out I was pregnant, and I chose to stay in America." So for one, I think that's empowering in one way. But as far as the daughter, it's almost like I don't want to say it's a sacrificial lamb, but she is very much used without receiving any real closure. Because even if the father had been alive, he was in such a state that she probably still wouldn't have been able to get anything from that experience. And then it turns out that he knew about her because she thought that he didn't know. So he knew about her and he chose still to never have anything to do with her.
Thousands rather than the one.
Right? Which is, again, what's the right choice, right? But I think that, and maybe that's the answer. Maybe we need to get to more of it's a both and not an either or, right? Like, you can help them and still have a relationship with your child in America, right? Or even the fact that like he doesn't come back to America, so he's literally dying. But you had a life that you could have had here that you chose not to. So it was a heavy story, in the sense of just a connection to your parentals. And what do you owe them? And what do they owe you? Right? I'm thinking about a poem and it's like, I had to realize that my mother was hers and not mine, or something along those lines, right? So like you have this expectation of your parents, or the parents have expectations of you, but in essence, we're all still our own individuals.
Mm-hmm.
But we're still tied to each other. So what's our accountability to other people, and should there be any? So yeah, I don't think we got that answer, but it was a lot to grapple with.
Yeah. I think everything you said was wonderful. I thought it was really cool for the main character, the young woman. She was a teacher.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like an English teacher or a second language teacher, which is similar to the previous story. Caroline and her sister, they were teachers. But just kind of how like her process of grading that one young kid's paper was changing, like as she was like gaining information and like getting like, so she was like, at first she was like, yeah, like this is an A, and then she was like, actually nah, this is an F because in my feelings. And then she went to Florida and she was like, I promise I'm gonna go back and like regrade that, you know. That was so realistic, like so human, like just such a human thing. And then yeah, what you mentioned is just right, spot on. Like my whole question was like, what did she gain from this? Like, what did she gain from this? Because she could have like literally lived the rest of her life and died and just never knew about this man and been okay. But like her now having, you know, another piece of herself, another like, and meeting her biological father, but in death. So she has like some understanding that he was alive and that he did know about her. And like how does that like assist her in her life? And
yeah,
does it?
yeah, and yeah.
And then also I was thinking about the role of the mother in this kind of too. And I didn't really have much to say about that, but like just to understand that like mom did have a role in this too.
Yeah, she chose. Just what you were saying. So two things. One is just, I guess, mother as protector in some sense, because in one sense she was protecting her by saying that he didn't know, right? Which turns out it wasn't true. But also then it's also, is mother the protector because the mother knows the extent to like the extent of the father's sickness, and she still has her daughter go, right? So at that point, like, who are you loyal to? Was a question. But I think the bigger question for me when you're saying what did she get from this, I was also pondering us as readers, what are we supposed to get from this? Because for me, I almost felt as if it ruined the book. Not ruined the entire book. That's a stretch. But I do feel as if previously it ended on such a note of women in their power and authority. And then we get this story where this woman has, and maybe that's the point, the juxtaposition is the point, but she goes out of like I guess she performs her duties out of service to her father that she doesn't know. But in essence, she's left with more questions than answers, and she has no closure that she desires. So I was wondering, like, as the reader, what are we supposed to take away from this newly like added story?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I told you like straight up, I didn't really take much from it. It was just, I mean, I took things from the individual story, but like it being a part of the previous, I didn't get much from it.
I also feel like it shifted, and maybe that was just me, but I feel like it shifted the focus from the women to the men. I feel like it then centered around this man. And I was trying to think, like, if this story had been just added somewhere else and not at the end, would I feel differently? And I don't think so. Maybe, but I'm not sure. So I like the original, but I do feel as if she's grown as a writer, and I appreciated that. And I think people should read her more. So I guess in the end, just like, what are your final thoughts? And if you could change anything about the book, what would it be if you had something?
So final thoughts. It gave me a lot to think about in terms of, I felt like as a reader, I was in a lot of times feeling emotions for the characters that they weren't really given space to feel for themselves, if that. So there was a lot of times when I felt rage and like I wanted to cry for them. And I wanted, for instance, like the story of Suzette following her mom around. I wanted her to have gotten what she wanted out of the relationship from her mom, but then also like I wanted her to also like kind of think deeper about those moments where mom was doing these intentional things that she may have not even recognized. And so I think for me, like I'm very much like a mood reader. I get very invested emotionally in the characters. And in this story, there was so much like pain and trauma and, disconnect and separation and space. I'm gonna keep saying space. That's my word of the day. And so I just kind of, what I got from that was, feeling emotions for the characters, but then also, and then this question, I think another thing I take away is this question, like, what is lost and gained in like the decisions that they've made, decisions that sometimes like were decisions that were kind of forced, like their hand was forced in it, and then also decisions that they just intentionally made for themselves, like for instance Guy getting on that balloon and jumping, and so many others. And if I can't say that I would change anything. I think, yeah, I don't know if that's like, I feel like that's could be my place to say, but
Okay.
um,
Yeah.
yeah, because I learned so much from this story. Like I don't think I'm in a place where I can say, or for me, that I would feel like I would want to change anything. Even the last story, which I didn't necessarily like being a part of the collective.
Yeah. Okay. I think that's fair. I think my major takeaway, one, I think this is just a great work, and to think that she wrote this over 20 years ago, and it just still being so poignant today is super impressive, and I guess it's just a sign of great writing in general. That's the point, for it to last through infamy. Um, but I think the thing that it leaves me with, again, is just this connection to home. And maybe just because where I am in my just exploration and really pondering. For me, I'm just thinking a lot about literature and how literature influences cultures and identities in general. So here we have so many characters who are trying to figure out identity and who they are. So I think for me here, that's just something that's sitting with me currently. But I think this is a great piece to explore. I do wish that something, I wouldn't change anything. I would just want additional stories. Um, just about, I would want someone who's trying to straddle both worlds by visiting both places. Like, I would want to see that because I think that that would just be great. And the analysis here of who are we in my connection to home. But that's just me being selfish. So I think that the collection as it is, I think is good. I think it's worth reading. Um, and I think Edwidge Danticat is a masterful writer that we should all read more. I still stand by that. So those are my final thoughts.
Yeah.
Yeah. I also just want to thank you. This was great.
This is really,
yeah. Yeah. So thank you for saying yes.
Yeah.
And I'm looking forward to our next read.
Me too.
Yeah, Giovanni's Room by the one and only James Baldwin. We're going to read that in August, so I'm excited to delve into that.
Yes. Yeah, I'm really excited for that. And I also enjoy, I think just one more thing I would like to say, and I mentioned earlier, like this wouldn't have probably been a story that I would have picked up, at least in the near future, like where I'm at right now. But I'm really happy I did, because it's just kind of opened my eyes to so many things that, new things that I haven't really thought about, but then also things that I have and I kind of forgot about, like, for instance, language and, the language that I am interested in, and like how that's so connected to colonization and pain and, parenthood. I mean, just things that, like, I don't even, as not being a parent, like, what does that feel like? It just gave me so many questions and so many things that I just kind of want to figure out, so I really just appreciate you, like, coming with this. And yeah.
Thanks, Reggie. We're looking forward to Giovanni's Room too. It should be dope. That one's been on my TBR for longer than I would like to admit.
Me too. I'm excited for it.
Me too. All right, that's it. Thank y'all for joining and following along with us. We hope to see y'all in the next one.
All right. Bye, y'all.
Peace. Also, for those of you inquiring, I do still have buttons, my MsMalcolmHughes pins, and the details on how to get those are below.